What does it mean to be remembered? Not just as an actor or a celebrity, but as a human being who endured storms most of us could never imagine. Few Hollywood figures embody this question as vividly as Johnny Depp. To some, he will always be the mischievous Captain Jack Sparrow, a pirate who redefined blockbuster cinema. To others, he is Edward Scissorhands, the quiet misfit who revealed vulnerability in every flicker of his eyes. Yet behind the unforgettable performances lies a man whose real life often felt more tragic, more chaotic, and more surreal than any script he ever performed. Depp's journey forces us to ask difficult questions. How does early trauma shape a person's art? What happens when fame, once a lifeline, becomes a prison? And can a person who has been broken in front of millions ever truly rebuild himself? Born into a childhood of turbulence, Depp carried wounds that would become the silent backdrop to his entire career. His guitar was his first refuge, but it was acting, a craft he stumbled into almost by accident, that gave him a new language for pain, rebellion, and survival. Hollywood made him a star, but it also devoured him, placing him under a magnifying glass so relentless that every mistake became global spectacle. His story is also one of contradictions. He's a man who turned down safe roles for risky, eccentric characters that challenged the very definition of stardom. He's an artist who built an empire of unimaginable wealth, only to watch it crumble in lawsuits and financial chaos. He is a lover who sought devotion, yet often found heartbreak. And he is a survivor who endured one of the most public and brutal celebrity trials of our time, only to emerge, at 60, transformed, not untouched, but undeniably alive. Why does this story matter to us? Because Johnny Depp's Odyssey is not simply about Hollywood. It's about the fragility of identity in a world that constantly tries to define us. It's about resilience when the weight of public judgment threatens to erase who we are. And it's about the quiet hope that even after devastation, we can still rebuild, not as the flawless image others expect, but as something truer, scarred yet whole. Over the next hour, we will follow his journey from a boy in Kentucky strumming his guitar to the heights of global fame, from heartbreaks and scandals to financial collapse and courtroom battles. And finally, to the quiet redemption of a man who has learned to live on his own terms. So, stay with us as we explore not just the legend of Johnny Depp, but the man, the misfit, the rebel, the survivor who against all odds continues to walk through fire and rise again. Every legend begins somewhere, and Johnny Depp's story starts far from the glitz of Hollywood. Born on June 9, 1963, in Owensboro, Kentucky, his earliest years were marked not by comfort, but by instability. His family moved more than 20 times before finally settling in Miramar, Florida, a pattern that left young Johnny without roots. While other children built friendships and memories in familiar neighborhoods, he was constantly packing boxes, saying goodbyes, and adjusting to new schools. At 12 years old, his mother handed him a guitar. For Johnny, it was more than an instrument. It was a sanctuary. Music gave shape to the grief he could not express in words. In cluttered garages and dimly lit rooms, he strummed chords that became confessions, each melody carrying the weight of unspoken pain. Where conversations at home ended in conflict, his guitar offered understanding. Music became his first form of therapy, rebellion, and even prayer. Like many teenagers in the 1970s, he dreamed of rock stardom. He joined small local bands, chasing moments of freedom under the glow of stage lights. However small the crowd, for an introverted boy who felt invisible in the classroom, music gave him an identity. Each song was a piece of himself offered to the world, fragile but defiant. Still, peace was never permanent. High school felt suffocating, and by 16, he dropped out. unable to balance his inner turmoil with rigid classrooms. In a rare moment of compassion, his principal reportedly told him to follow his passion instead of forcing himself back into a system that didn't fit. In the early 1980s, he and his band moved to Los Angeles, chasing the same elusive promise that drew countless young dreamers to the city. But reality hit hard. Instead of packed arenas, Depp found himself scraping by with odd jobs just to afford rent. His rock and roll fantasy collapsed almost as quickly as it began, leaving him stranded and restless in a city that could swallow hope whole. Depp's childhood was not just difficult, it was merciless. Yet from that crucible of pain emerged a creative spirit sharpened by loneliness, softened by music, and restless for expression. In many ways, his later acting career can only be understood through this foundation. The same vulnerability that made Edward Scissorhands so haunting, or Captain Jack Sparrow so unpredictable, was born in those teenage years of grief, solitude, and song. What saved Depp in those years wasn't fame or fortune. It was creativity. His guitar gave him permission to feel, to translate suffering into something others could hear. That lesson, that art can turn pain into survival, would follow him into every stage of his life. By the time fate nudged him toward acting, Johnny was already an artist in spirit. He just hadn't yet found the medium that would carry his voice to the world. Music had kept him alive. Cinema would make him unforgettable. Johnny Depp never intended to be an actor. His dream was to be on the music scene, with a guitar and a rock band. But when his music career quickly collapsed in Los Angeles, Depp found himself stuck, working odd jobs to make ends meet. That's when a stroke of luck changed everything. Through his ex-wife, Lori Ann Allison, he met Nicolas Cage. Cage saw a different depth in Depp and suggested he try acting. Depp initially turned it down, but eventually accepted the audition and made a surprise appearance in A Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. The role was small, but enough to get Hollywood's attention. Depp realized that cinema, like music, could become a language for him to express pain and difference that words could not reach. Just a few years later, Depp got his big break as Officer Tom Hansen on the series 21 Jump Street. The show was a huge success, turning him into a teen idol across America. But instead of enjoying it, Depp felt trapped. He described the experience as a golden cage, famous, rich, but deprived of his own truth. That was the beginning of Depp's artistic rebellion. Instead of accepting the safe image that Hollywood had built for him, he was determined to choose strange, edgy roles that reflected his true self. 21 Jump Street brought Depp to the peak of fame, but also instilled in him the desire to break out of the idol frame and become a true artist. When 21 Jump Street ended, Johnny Depp faced a choice most actors dream of, but few dare to reject. He could cash in on his fame, accept the safe romantic lead roles Hollywood was eager to offer, and cement himself as a conventional star. Instead, he turned his back on that path. Depp wasn't chasing stability, he was chasing authenticity. And for him, authenticity meant risk. The 1990s became his era of reinvention. His first move was almost tongue-in-cheek, Cry Baby, John Waters' eccentric parody of 1950s teen idols. By playing a rebellious rockabilly caricature, Depp mocked the very image that had imprisoned him on Jump Street. It was a declaration of independence. He would no longer be Hollywood's poster boy. That same year, everything changed. Depp teamed up with director Tim Burton for Edward Scissorhands, a gothic fairy tale about a gentle outsider cursed with blades instead of hands. The film struck like lightning. Depp hardly spoke a word, yet audiences felt his loneliness, tenderness, and pain. The haunted eyes, the fragile movements, these weren't just acting choices. They were echoes of Depp's own youth. Viewers weren't just watching Edward, they were glimpsing Johnny himself, still the wounded boy from Kentucky trying to carve a place in the world. The performance made him an artist in the public eye. Overnight, Depp and Burton forged a creative partnership built on a shared fascination with the odd, the broken, and the misunderstood, together. They reshaped Hollywood's idea of what a leading man could be. Throughout the 1990s, Depp doubled down on these unconventional choices. He played quirky dreamers in Benny and June, 1993, and the infamous director Ed Wood, 1994. A role that could have been played for laughs, but that Depp infused with sincerity and compassion. In Jim Jarmusch's Dead Man, 1995. He wandered a bleak frontier as a lost accountant turned reluctant outlaw. By 1998, in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. He Venice. These weren't roles designed to guarantee box office success. They were risky, strange, and often baffling to studio executives. But they defined Depp as something rare in Hollywood, a star who refused to be manufactured. Each oddball character was a rebellion against conformity, but also a mirror of Depp himself. Misfits, outsiders, eccentrics. He wasn't just playing them, he was revealing the part of himself that never fit neatly into Hollywood's polished mold. And audiences responded. By the end of the decade, Johnny Depp was no longer just a former teen idol. He was a cultural icon of individuality, a living symbol of artistic courage. He showed that vulnerability could be heroic, that strangeness could be beautiful, and that rebellion could be art. Looking back, this chapter feels like Depp's true birth as a cinematic force. He wasn't yet the global superstar of the Pirates era, but he had carved out a niche that no one else could fill. His partnership with Burton, his fearless choices, and his devotion to misfits gave him not just a career, but an identity. In a Hollywood obsessed with predictability, Johnny Depp became unforgettable precisely because he refused to play by the rules. By the early 2000s, Johnny Depp was established as Hollywood's favorite outsider. Critics admired him, cinephiles respected him, but mainstream audiences still saw him as a quirky actor who lived on the margins of box office success. That all changed in 2003 with the release of Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. Disney executives initially saw the project as little more than a theme park cash grab. But Depp had other ideas. When he first appeared on set as Captain Jack Sparrow, staggering, slurring, and swaying with gold teeth and eyeliner, the studio panicked. Executives whispered that he was drunk, mocking the film, even sabotaging a $100 million production. Depp, however, stood his ground. He insisted Sparrow was modeled after rock icons like Keith Richards, a pirate who was less a hero and more a trickster, someone unpredictable, dangerous, yet irresistibly charming. The gamble paid off. Audiences were hypnotized. Captain Jack Sparrow was unlike any Disney hero before him, scrappy, sly, and deeply human despite the absurdity. Depp turned what could have been a caricature into a cultural phenomenon. For the first time, the world saw not just an eccentric actor, but a blockbuster star. The role earned him his first Academy Award nomination and cemented his place in cinematic history. What followed was a tidal wave of sequels, each bigger and more extravagant than the last. From 2003 to 2011, the Pirates franchise became one of Disney's most lucrative properties, grossing billions worldwide. Depp, once scraping by in Los Angeles, was suddenly among the highest-paid actors in Hollywood. Reports suggested he earned upwards of $55 million for Alice in Wonderland and $60 million for Dead Man's Chest. His face was everywhere, his swagger instantly recognizable, and for a time, he seemed untouchable. But the weight of such success carried a hidden cost. Depp admitted that endlessly revisiting Jack Sparrow dulled his instincts. What began as a daring act of rebellion slowly became a formula he was expected to repeat. The joy of transformation that had fueled him as an actor soured into monotony. Behind the gold teeth and drunken swagger, he felt trapped once again, this time not by teen idol fame, but by the very character that had made him a legend. The public adoration was enormous. Yet Depp confessed to feeling isolated. His long-term partnership with French singer Vanessa Paradis, once a source of stability, began to crumble. His private life became fodder for tabloids, and the line between Jack Sparrow and Johnny Depp blurred until he himself admitted feeling lost. The irony was haunting at the very peak of his fame. Depp felt most unseen. Still, his artistry never vanished, even within the endless press tours and exhausting filming schedules. He poured vulnerability and eccentric humor into Sparrow, elevating the character beyond cartoonish swashbuckling. He created not just a pirate, but an anti-hero, tortured, magnetic, and unforgettable for many. Captain Jack wasn't just a role, he was Depp himself, rebelling against convention with charm and chaos. Yet this chapter of triumph was also a warning. Fame that once promised freedom became another cage. The pressure to maintain an empire, to please studios, to keep audiences entertained, began to erode his spirit. Depp had once turned down safe roles for authenticity. Now, authenticity was at risk of being swallowed by expectation. By the end of the 2000s, Depp was wealthier and more famous than ever, but also lonelier, more exhausted, and increasingly vulnerable to the personal storms that were gathering. The man who had built a career on playing outsiders was about to experience his own exile, not from the screen, but from the stability of his own life. Behind the eccentric roles and global fame, Johnny Depp's personal life often mirrored the turbulence of his career. His romances, far from being quiet chapters, were dramatic stories of devotion, heartbreak, and, later, public collapse that threatened to overshadow his artistry entirely. Depp's first marriage, to makeup artist Lori Ann Allison in the early 1980s, was brief but pivotal. She introduced him to Nicolas Cage, the man who nudged him toward acting. That union may have ended quickly, but it opened the door to his destiny. The relationship that defined Depp's middle years came later. In 1998, when he met French actress and singer Vanessa Paradis. Together, they built what seemed like an oasis far from Hollywood chaos. They raised 2 children, Lily Rose in 1999 and Jack in 2002. And for 14 years, the family gave Depp something he had always craved: stability. Fatherhood grounded him, softening his restless edges. He often said becoming a dad gave him a foundation stronger than fame or fortune. But even strong foundations can crack. By 2012, the partnership dissolved quietly but painfully. Though the breakup avoided scandal, it devastated Depp, leaving him adrift just as he entered his 50s. Not long after, Depp met actress Amber Heard on the set of The Rum Diary. Their chemistry was instant, and by 2015 they were married. What seemed like a new beginning quickly collapsed into chaos. Within 15 months, the marriage ended amid allegations of abuse and violence. Heard accused Depp of physical and verbal assaults tied to substance use, while Depp insisted he was the true victim of manipulation and deceit. What might have been a private divorce instead spiraled into one of the most public celebrity scandals of the modern era. Headlines blared accusations, social media became a courtroom, and Hollywood distanced itself from the once untouchable star. Depp, who had spent decades building a reputation as an eccentric but beloved outsider, suddenly found himself branded as toxic. The legal battles dragged on for years. Heard's 2018 op-ed in the Washington Post, describing herself as a survivor of domestic abuse, ignited a defamation suit that culminated in the 2022 trial in Virginia. For 6 weeks, the world watched their private life torn open in excruciating detail. Audio recordings, text messages, accusations, and counter-accusations all played out in front of millions. It was less a trial than a cultural event, with hashtags trending daily and the public divided into camps. In the end, the jury largely sided with Depp, awarding him $10 million in damages while granting her $2 million in her countersuit. Depp declared, "The jury gave me my life back." Yet the cost of survival had been brutal. For 6 years, he had been exiled from the very industry that once celebrated him. He lost major roles in franchises like Fantastic Beasts and Pirates of the Caribbean. His fortune dwindled, his reputation shattered, and his emotional wounds deepened. The irony is haunting. Depp, who once embodied misfits and outsiders on screen, became an outsider in real life, alienated from Hollywood, scrutinized by the public, and fighting to reclaim his identity. Even in victory, the scars remained. No verdict could erase the humiliation of being dissected by the world in real time. Yet this chapter, as painful as it was, also revealed something essential: Depp's resilience. Where many would have disappeared, he endured. He stood through years of ridicule, held onto his art, and, though battered, emerged with a voice that still mattered. His romantic life was never simply about love. It became a battlefield where he lost not only relationships, but also trust, reputation, and peace. And yet, as he walked out of that Virginia courtroom in 2022, he carried with him the fragile hope of redemption. Not as the untouchable icon he once was, but as a man who had been publicly broken and yet refused to vanish. If Johnny Depp's personal life was turbulent, his financial journey was equally dramatic. At the height of his career, he wasn't just a Hollywood star, he lived like a king. Reports estimated his fortune at over $600 million, an empire built from decades of films, endorsements, and global fame. But what made headlines wasn't just how much he earned, it was how much he spent. Depp's world was a gallery of extravagance. He owned a 37-acre French village that he restored into a personal paradise, multiple penthouses in Los Angeles, a horse farm in Kentucky, and even a chain of islands in the Bahamas where he escaped the noise of Hollywood. His yacht, the Vajolaroja, named after Vanessa, Johnny, and their children, was a floating palace of handcrafted wood, vintage decor, and family memories. To outsiders, these properties were the spoils of stardom. To Depp, they were sanctuaries, ways to build beauty and retreat from chaos. But extravagance came at staggering costs. His lifestyle reportedly required nearly $2 million per month to maintain. That included $150,000 for 24/7 security, $300,000 for a staff of 40, and $30,000 a month on wine alone. His garage was filled with vintage cars, from a 1959 Corvette to a Ferrari 488 Spider, while private jets consumed hundreds of thousands monthly. One of the most notorious expenses was the $3 million he spent to fulfill his friend Hunter S. Thompson's wish of having his ashes blasted from a cannon. For years, Depp's films and endorsements sustained the empire. Blockbusters like Pirates of the Caribbean, Alice in Wonderland, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory earned him tens of millions each. Dior's Sauvage campaign added millions annually. But behind the glamour, cracks were forming. In 2017, those cracks became impossible to ignore when Depp sued his former management group, the management group, TMG, accusing them of mismanaging his fortune. The lawsuit was explosive. TMG countered with claims that Depp's financial ruin was his own doing. pointing to reckless spending habits that no income could sustain. Court filings revealed the full extent of his expenditures, from lavish real estate to impulsive art purchases. The public, once dazzled by his eccentricity, now viewed his finances as a cautionary tale. Headlines mocked his excess, while critics painted him as a celebrity out of touch with reality. But the truth, as always, with Depp, was more complex. Yes, he spent recklessly, but those closest to him noted that his extravagance was often less about ego and more about grief. Properties, cars, and wine were distractions from loneliness, shields against the chaos of broken love and relentless fame. His empire wasn't built purely on indulgence, it was also built on pain. Still, reality forced him to downsize. He sold the French estate, the Los Angeles penthouses, and eventually the yacht once filled with family memories, which was bought by J.K. Rowling. Each sale symbolized more than financial necessity. It was the dismantling of a life he had built to protect himself. Piece by piece, the empire crumbled, leaving Depp not ruined but stripped bare. By his mid-50s, Depp's net worth had dropped by hundreds of millions. What had once seemed like an untouchable kingdom was exposed as fragile and unsustainable. And yet, as humiliating as the revelations were, they also marked a turning point. For the first time in decades, Depp began shedding illusions. He could no longer hide behind wealth or palaces. The collapse forced him to confront who he was without the empires of excess. Looking back, Depp's financial downfall mirrors the larger arc of his life. A man who reached dazzling heights, only to be brought low, and who found in the ruins the possibility of clarity. Fame gave him fortune. Excess nearly destroyed him. But in losing much of it, he gained something he hadn't known he needed: freedom from the illusions that money could buy peace. By the time Johnny Depp turned 60, he looked nothing like the hollow-eyed figure tabloids had paraded during his darkest years. The man who once seemed consumed by scandal, financial ruin, and legal warfare reappeared with a striking transformation. Silver streaks in his hair, a weathered beard, and a calm, reflective presence. For longtime fans, it was almost disorienting. The fiery rebel of the 1990s had given way to someone more measured, almost serene. But this transformation wasn't about vanity, it was survival. His appearance at Cannes in 2023, promoting Jean du Barry, marked a symbolic rebirth. Critics and audiences alike noted how different he seemed. Not desperate for attention, not clinging to lost fame, simply present, carrying himself with dignity. For Depp, the shift wasn't about reclaiming Hollywood status. It was about stepping into a new identity, one no longer defined by spectacle. In his own words, "I don't think about Hollywood anymore." Those 6 words cut to the heart of his reinvention. For decades, Hollywood had been both his lifeline and his tormentor. It gave him fortune and fame, then stripped it away in a storm of scandals by choosing to walk away. Depp wasn't retreating in defeat. He was reclaiming his peace. In this new chapter, art returned to the center of his life, not just acting, but painting, writing, and above all, music. With Alice Cooper and Joe Perry, he continued performing with the Hollywood Vampires, a supergroup that reminded him of his first love. The guitar handed to him at age 12. On stage, Depp wasn't Captain Jack Sparrow or Willy Wonka. He was simply Johnny, a man reconnecting with the refuge that had saved him as a boy. He also turned inward, embracing solitude as liberation rather than loneliness. Instead of sprawling estates and armies of staff, his world became smaller, quieter, more intentional. He chose to spend much of his time in the French countryside, where vineyards and stone walls replaced paparazzi flashes. Here, surrounded by art, nature, and a handful of trusted friends, Depp began to heal. Fatherhood remained his anchor. His daughter Lily Rose carved her own path as an actress and model, while his son Jack stayed largely out of the spotlight. Depp often spoke of how fatherhood gave him strength when everything else collapsed. That bond endured through his darkest years, and in this quieter chapter, it provided a sense of redemption. For all his fame, his proudest role seemed to be father, not star. Romance, once a battlefield of passion and destruction, faded into the background. Rumors occasionally linked him to companions, but Depp himself seemed uninterested in confirming anything. Instead, solitude became his choice, for the first time since his youth. He lived alone with himself and found peace there. His health, too, reflected during the years of trials. He appeared gaunt, exhausted, sometimes frail, but by the time he stepped onto the red carpet in his 60s, the difference was visible. He looked revitalized, not because the years had vanished, but because he carried them with acceptance. The storms had etched lines into his face, but they also carved resilience into his presence. Perhaps the most telling symbol of his rebirth came in Jean Dubarry, and later in Daydrinker, where critics praised his nuanced performances as restrained, aching, and deeply human. It wasn't about box office numbers, it was about authenticity. Depp no longer seemed interested in proving himself as a blockbuster star. Instead, he chose projects that spoke to him, that allowed him to create with honesty. This version of Johnny Depp, the artist, father, survivor, feels more compelling than any role he has ever played. He is no longer chasing the myth of immortality. He is living with reflection, with scars, with peace. In the end, that may be his greatest act of defiance, refusing to let Hollywood define him, and choosing instead to define himself. Johnny Depp's story is often told in headlines: the oddball roles, the extravagant mansions, the courtroom scandals. But when you strip away the noise, what remains is something far more universal: the journey of a man who has stumbled, fallen, and somehow kept getting back up. From a boy in Kentucky strumming a guitar to one of the most recognizable actors in the world. Depp's life has been marked by extremes. He has lived through childhood trauma, the intoxicating glow of fame, the crushing isolation of scandal, and the painful collapse of fortune and love. At times, it seemed the storms would swallow him whole, and yet, every fall became a strange kind of rebirth. What makes his story so compelling is not the spectacle, but the survival. Many stars vanish after one major scandal, yet Depp refused to disappear. He endured the jeers, the trials, the betrayals, and still emerged, not unscarred but alive. His face now carries the weight of those years, but also a quiet resilience that feels almost more powerful than his youthful rebellion. There is a lesson here for all of us. Fame, wealth, and applause may look like the markers of success, but they do not guarantee peace. Depp had all of them, and still found himself lost. What ultimately saved him was not the empire he built, but the simplicity he returned to: his guitar, his art, his children, his solitude. The boy who once used music as a refuge found, 6 decades later, that the same refuge still remained. Depp's journey reminds us that healing doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes slowly, in the decision to keep moving forward even when the world is watching you fail. It comes in accepting scars as part of your story instead of trying to erase them. And it comes in realizing that peace is not something others can hand you. It's something you choose for yourself. As viewers, we often crave the comeback narrative, the dramatic return to glory, the box office smash, the standing ovation. But Depp's redemption is quieter and perhaps more meaningful. It isn't about reclaiming Hollywood's throne. It's about reclaiming himself. He no longer seems to care about being the most famous man in the room. Instead, he has chosen to be present, reflective, and at peace. And maybe that's the real takeaway. No matter how badly life unravels, whether in the public eye or in private, survival itself is a form of victory. To endure is to win. Depp's life is a reminder that we are not defined by our lowest moments, nor by the images others project onto us. We are defined by our ability to rise, altered but still whole. So what about you? How do you see Johnny Depp's journey? As a cautionary tale? As a story of resilience? Or perhaps as a mirror of your own struggles? Share your thoughts below, because in honoring not just the myth, but the man, we also honor the truth that survival, quiet, scarred, and steady, is the greatest triumph of all.